Hey, hey. Well, I want to welcome you if we haven't met. My name is Jake. I hope that at some point today we will meet if we have not. And just want to welcome especially those new visitors. Because all of you have been here before. You know I love you. You know I love you. So you know. But we've been in this series, we just started last week, called The Good, the True, and the Beautiful. A big picture look at this journey of consciousness that really is not only unfolding throughout our universe, but in our lives, that we grow and shift and change. And in those changes, in those evolutions in our own heart and spirit, we develop a greater capacity for goodness, a greater capacity for truth, and a greater capacity for beauty. And I know for me, this service is really an attempt at trying to bring some hope into our lives because, you know, you might look out at the world today and you might say, wow, I don't know if I see goodness and truth and beauty emerging in our world. And so this series is about saying, despite all that, may we develop the awareness, may we develop the eyes to see that love is showing up in our midst. May we then have the ability to express it, not just an internal realization, but may we bring about more love, goodness, truth, and beauty in our midst. And maybe when we do that, that is the very place where the divine is showing up in our lives. And so last week, we started this conversation talking about the good. We said that the good is this internal shift that happens where we start to expand our definition throughout our lives of how we define goodness. And perhaps through that expanded definition, our ability to then be compassionate and be loving changes, grows, and evolves throughout our lives. And so that was last week. This week, we're going to be talking about truth, capital T, truth. And I thought to start off, we could play a game. How does that sound? There you go. Not what you're thinking, not truth or dare. We're not going to play truth or dare. We're going to play two truths and a lie. I don't know if you all remember that game, right? No, I kind of have a problem with this game because I feel like a lot of times people use this game to brag a little bit. You know, they'll be like, okay, here are my two truths and a lie. I'm super rich. I've traveled a lot of places and I can breathe underwater, right? And you're just like, okay, I know you're just telling me something about yourself and you just want, you know, so we're not going to do that today. I'm going to do a really grounded two truths and a lie, but it is going to be vulnerable about myself. Okay, you ready? Are you ready? Okay, here are my two truths and a lie. All right, I'm double jointed. I have not had my wisdom teeth removed, or I am physically unable to burp. Okay, confer with your group, confer with your friends. I'm giving you some time. I really want you to feel good about your answers. Okay, how many of you feel that the lie is that I'm double jointed? Just a few. Okay, how many of you feel that the lie is that I still have my wisdom teeth? Maybe a little more. How many of you feel that the lie is that I'm physically unable to burp? Most of you. Okay. The lie is that I'm double jointed. So now you know something about me, or a few things. This would also be, you know, truth is vulnerability, right? So there's a little bit of sharing going on. The reason I wanted to play that game, though, is because, you know, we look at the world today, and the world in some ways feels like two truths and a lie. Maybe the world actually feels like two lies and a truth. You guessed it. It's been said, this phrase has actually been coined, that we live in a post-truth society. It can be so difficult for us to know what to trust anymore on the news, from authority, from institutions. Our trust in these places that we used to go to for truth has essentially been broken. Right? And so we're living in a society where truth is a really interesting hot button topic. And that is not even to begin to mention AI and the way that we're questioning reality with AI. A few years ago, there was a woman who was scammed out of $850,000 because she was led to believe through fraud and through the use of AI that she was in a relationship with Brad Pitt, and that Brad Pitt needed her help with some hospital bills. Now, I understand that there are some of you out there that if you were led to believe that you were in a relationship with Brad Pitt, that you might for at least a day, be willing to live in the lie. I understand that. I would understand that. The harder thing to believe is that Brad Pitt would need help with hospital bills. I want to show you the pictures that were used. This is a few years ago. And just remember, AI has gotten a lot better in the last year, in the last couple of months even. These are the photos used to show that this woman, this one in particular is my favorite because I don't think there are photos allowed in the OR, you know what I mean? So, but unfortunately, this woman was scammed. I don't remember checking if her money was returned, but ultimately, yeah, it's just an indication of where our society's at, right? Because I don't know about you, but there's something that happens where even if you see a photo or a video or a news headline, the first thing you go to these days is it even real, right? And that is not even to begin to talk about the journey and the process of questioning that many of us have been a part of, right, for our lives and perhaps throughout our spiritual journeys. Maybe you grew up in a religion or a culture or a family system or even a nation as a whole in which you were handed certain truths that you were meant to take as law, as fact. You were told this is just the way it is. And I'd venture a guess that many of us out here today, we have questioned some of those things throughout our life journey. I'd venture a guess that even by being here today, that at least when it comes to your spiritual journey, that you question some things you were taught. Anyone out there question some things that you were taught? And this can be a very fruitful experience. It can lead us to truth, but it most certainly also leads to a weariness, right? To this feeling of where can I even put my trust anymore? And so what I want to do today is I want to remind us that we are capable of discerning truth. That perhaps when we are questioning truth, or we are questioning what we have been told, perhaps that is a signal that our inner compass is working. And that perhaps where you and I are invited to grow, where we are being challenged in our lives, maybe that is the very place where truth is finding us. Last week, we described how this journey of the good, the true, and the beautiful is all an invitation toward greater love in our lives. That goodness is inviting us towards compassion and love. That wherever goodness is showing up in our lives, it's an invitation to love and be kind to others. Wherever beauty is showing up in our lives, it's this invitation to trust that we are loved, that where you see beauty in nature, in human joy and connection, that those are places where we should recognize, oh, wow, there is love in this universe and there is love for me. But then there's truth, and truth is perhaps the most challenging and yet holds the most potential of the three, because truth is the invitation to grow and to expand into greater love, which can often be scary. Can it be challenging? See, in our lives, we desire truth most of the time, right? Most of the time. There are occasions where we don't want truth. We might think we do, right? See, like there are times where I've put an outfit together and I share it to my partner, Olivia. I say, does this outfit match? Does it go together? And she looks and she pauses and she goes, well, actually, not really. It's kind of, and in that moment, instantly I realize I did not want the truth. I wanted her to tell me that it looked great. Sometimes the reverse happens. Sometimes she'll be writing an email and she'll be like, hey, how does this email sound? And I'll be like, well, I changed that line here or there. And she's like, you know what? Never mind. But most of the time, we do crave honesty, particularly in our relationships, right? And we also perhaps desire a deep spiritual truth. Truth that maybe doesn't even fit into language. It doesn't quite fit our normal mode of understanding, but there is deep spiritual truths that hit us at this level of the heart, as John was talking about this morning, that find us at the level of soul that we may not even have the words for. And so what I want to name today is that truth shows up in all these different forms in our lives, that we might be people who would be able to pay attention to all the forms that truth is arriving and emerging in our lives, because truth does not show up in a singular way. It is quite multifaceted. And the first way I want to explore this is through the idea that truth does not always fit into our neat categories or boxes. Truth does not always fit into a true or false paradigm. I miss true or false questions on tests. I love taking a test with true or false questions because I knew I had a 50-50 chance of getting it right. It's pretty good odds, right? There are things in life that do have this true or false, 50-50, black or white kind of thing. Is something real? Did something happen, right? You might look at something and say, okay, this is fact, this is fiction. This is correct, this is not. You might look at something like, you might ask the question, is curling the weirdest Olympic sport? And you could say, true, right? It's a simple true or false question. Of course, right? It's without a doubt the weirdest Olympic sport. No, I'm just kidding. But things often do not fit into our true and false paradigm, particularly in the realm of the spiritual, right? Like if you were to ask me, is there a God, true or false? For me personally, how I would answer that question does not fit into simple boxes of true or false. The true or false boxes do not do justice to the depth that would need to be required to speak on an answer for something like that. Do you have 8 or 9 hours? Then maybe we can get on the same page, right? Maybe I could at least feel understood. And I'm not talking, that's not because my answer is anything special. It's because it's a realm of human experience that we all share that holds a depth that true or false simply cannot do justice to. I'll use another example, and it's an example that I know may be pertinent to some of us because a lot of us grew up in a tradition where we were told, hey, this Bible, this is 100% literally true. And because that's something that I know a lot of us have experienced, I'll just use it as an example today. If you were to ask me, do I find the Bible to be true or false? I would say, well, a lot of it I don't find to be literally true. But much of it I find to be deeply true in terms of human experience. Things can be true on various levels. See, the Bible and most wisdom texts were not written in a time in human history in which the writers would have delineated between fact or fiction, between myth or history. Things were a lot more blended back then, right? In the BC Barnes and Nobles, they did not have a nonfiction section, okay? It was all together. I got a bigger laugh in first service. Okay. Worked on that one, so. There are objective truths, right? The sky is blue, golf is boring. I've made some enemies. This is a divisive one today. I know, gloves off. There are objective truths, but then there are transformational truths, right? Truths like love. Love is a truth, and yet can you hold it in your hands? Can you measure it with a technological device, right? Think about the times that you've walked out of a movie or you've put down a book or you've listened to a song and you felt so seen. You felt like there were deep truths about the human experience being spoken about or described in that work of art. And yet perhaps it was a work of fiction, right? Perhaps it didn't actually describe events that physically happened in our reality, and yet it spoke to a deep truth of existence. Because friends, there are different levels that truth finds us. A physicist named Niels Bohr said this: the opposite of a correct statement is a false statement, but the opposite of a profound truth may well be another profound truth. There are layers of truth that do not fit in the yes or no, black and white categories. And so perhaps for us, the invitation today is to recognize those levels, to recognize that sometimes it will bring us into places of paradox where we can maybe say, there are things that I might interact with in my life that perhaps are not literally true and yet are deeply spiritually true. Maybe this is an invitation to update our definitions or bring in some nuance to the conversation of truth. What is that going to look like, though? How do we discern truth if we are opening up to all these different possibilities? Well, some questions I would ask hopefully that might get us thinking today is this truth inviting me to grow? Is it inviting me to expand? You know, if we're going to talk about expanding, then of course we have to talk about sushi, right? Obviously. No? Okay. Well, I grew up eating sushi. It's my favorite food in the world. And when I was a kid, I would always be dumbfounded because I would eat what I didn't think was that much sushi, and then I would be so full. My stomach had expanded. And I was told, what I ended up finding out is that the white rice expands in your stomach. So I'm used to enjoying my favorite sushi and then being uncomfortable afterwards. I realize that's part of the deal. But what I've also realized about human experience and our spirituality is often when we are expanding, it can show up as being uncomfortable. But perhaps our uncomfortability is a sign that we're being invited to grow. So the question I have for you, for all of us today is, are the things that we hold to be true, the things that perhaps are essential to us, things that we hold to be true about God, about love, about our relationships, are they expanding our awareness, or are they further entrenching us in our comfort zones? Are they opening our heart, or are they putting up more walls? There's an author named Flannery O'Connor who said, the truth does not change according to our ability to stomach it. Speaking of stomachs. That perhaps the truth does not expand for us. Perhaps we expand for truth. This is why I think truth can so often rattle us. It can be disturbing at first. Like there might be some of us out there who have done, therapy or difficult kinds of inner work where part of that process is simply uncovering things that you didn't realize you didn't want to acknowledge or you didn't want to look at. And perhaps what you realize is, wow, this aspect of myself or my experience has actually been true the whole time. I just didn't realize it, or I wasn't ready to acknowledge it, to look at it. This can be difficult. And what's interesting is I find that this is a version of what may be happening in our world today, that what we are experiencing as a great chaos in our world is perhaps one aspect of it is many truths coming to light that are hard for us to look at, that are hard for us to stomach. Truths about all kinds of things that when we acknowledge them, destabilize our sense of who we are in the world, right? Maybe aspects of nation and religion, all kinds of things that, as they're revealed, seem to indicate that things are maybe falling apart or plunging us into chaos. But I do have some hope here, okay? You're like, how? What would that look like? There is a word. I'm going to make it worse before I get better, okay? The word for apocalypse. Don't worry. Don't worry. There's a silver lining here. The word for apocalypse in Greek, this word that shows up throughout even things like the book of Revelation, which we tend to think of as a scripture about the end times. This word for apocalypse in Greek is apocalypsis, which does not mean the end of the world. It does not mean destruction or death. What apocalypsis actually means is the end of a certain cycle or way of being in the world, in which there is a great uncovering of that which has been hidden. That there is a great bringing to the light and revealing truths that have been kept down. And this gives me great hope that even when we perceive a world that is falling apart and we perceive a world in chaos, perhaps one of the things that is happening is that truth is coming to light. Light is trying to enter into our situation, and it feels violent and it feels disruptive. But sometimes, friends, that is the way that truth shows up. So I just ask all of us today, is the invitation of truth expanding us? Is the invitation of truth uncomfortable in this moment? Because maybe it is uncovering something, and maybe just now we are ready to sit with and acknowledge that truth. One of the ways that truth is most uncomfortable and yet is most inviting us to expand is to acknowledge the truth of what we don't know. See, often the most truthful and the most honest thing we could do is acknowledge our own uncertainty. Because uncertainty actually is a vehicle that leads us to greater truth. Shows up in different ways, right? Like sometimes we are spiritually uncertain. Like we would say, I don't really know exactly what's happening. I don't really know the answers. I don't have the full scope of what life is and reality. I don't really know. Who knows? No one knows. And you know what? Maybe I'm okay with that. Maybe it's relational uncertainty, like these moments where we find ourselves in conflict or difficulty with people that we love, and maybe we perceive that they're upset with us, or there's slights or some different aspect of conflict. And I don't know if you ever had these moments, but maybe moments where you could step back and you could say, maybe I can be a little uncertain about what they might be feeling. Maybe I'm going to invite a little bit of space to not be 100% sure about what they might be experiencing. In other words, just giving someone the benefit of the doubt. And I know there are probably a lot of us out there that would say that just inviting that level of uncertainty actually saved a relationship or two, right? Because you were willing to be wrong. And certainly uncertainty shows up in our personal lives. Right? Like if we're honest, there are just times in our lives where we don't know what the right choice is. We don't know what to do in a given situation. Something happens when we can become comfortable with uncertainty, when we can tolerate being wrong. I think that a wisdom starts to enter into our lives. That there's this willingness to be scientific about our lives. And I know that word, for some of you might immediately think sterile, you might think lab coats, but I'm not talking about that type of scientific. I'm talking about the curiosity of being scientific. See, science has theories, but by definition, these theories are things that are meant to be proved wrong, right? There's a willingness for the information to be updated and continually evaluated, right? Even something like the Big Bang. Quite recently, physicists are questioning the Big Bang and going, hey, maybe there are aspects of it that we have taken for granted that we need to take a look, and there are things going on here that we do not even fully understand, because the Big Bang has always been a theory, right? And so there's this aspect of science which holds loosely that which is taken as, the best working theory. And when things are proven wrong, it simply leads us all down to the next leg of the path of truth. There was an interview recently with the Dalai Lama, and the interviewer asked him this interesting hypothetical. He said, if there were to come out some science, let's say, that were to disprove Buddhism, what would you do? And the Dalai Lama, nearly without skipping a beat, said, well, I guess we'd go with the science. And the irony is, that's the most Buddhist answer he could possibly give, right? He did some really good work there. But it's a powerful approach, right? To almost take a scientific method approach to our lives and our journeys, because the scientific method starts with a hypothesis, an idea, a concept, and then it tests it, quite open to it being disproven, because that process of elimination says, well, that didn't work, on to the next. And I'd venture that for some of us out there, this is how we got where we are in our spiritual journeys and got to the spiritual truths that are deeply personal and authentic to us. Like maybe you're like me, you grew up in a Christian environment, and maybe some of it rang true and some of it didn't. Right? Or maybe you moved into some things that someone might call more new age, and some of that rang true and some of it didn't. And all along the way, through trusting your own intuition, your own experience, you were able to build something that was uniquely yours. Right? Perhaps instead of a scientific method, we could develop a spiritual method, right? Where in the scientific method uses the data of hard facts and experiments, perhaps spiritually we can use the data of our experience, right? And the data of the soul. For this, trusting ourselves, trusting what we find to be true in our journey is essential. And I just want to take a little detour into the land of trust for a second, because the origins for our word for truth comes from a Proto-Indo-European root, dru, which means faithful or steadfast, not correct or incorrect, not true or false, but something that can be relied upon. something that can be depended upon, which is perfect for the fact that it is the same root word for tree, something that you can lean on, you can stand on, and the same root word for trust. That, friends, truth is, much like a tree, that which you can trust, that which you can depend on. So what I want to invite us to today, this morning, is to trust our experience as the data of the soul. See, how many of us had something that a tradition told us was true, and our experience was something else? And so we questioned, so we had to trust our own experience. I talked a little bit last week about how just in my own journey, particularly growing up in a religious environment, I had what I was told about being gay, right? And that not being part of God's plan. And then all of a sudden throughout my life, my experience, my interactions with beautiful, wonderful people, and my witness of love showing up in all kinds of forms and all kinds of ways, my experience challenged everything that my tradition had taught me. The same thing went for my view of other faiths. I was told that the Christian faith was superior than other faiths, and then my experience came along and showed me that no, there is beauty, goodness, and truth all around. David Bohm, another physicist, says that truth is what stands the test of experience. Right? So can we trust what the test of experience shows up in our lives? Maybe for us, the invitation of truth is to question that which our own experience has disproven. Having a little trust and faith that, yes, goodness, truth, and beauty is showing up in your lives, in your hearts. Because there are powers in this world that will make you want to question whether you can trust yourself. Right? But it's important, friends, for us to hone in on that trust. And if you're like me, probably sometimes you might have an inner experience that you know you can trust and that shows up as truth, and yet it's still difficult to align that inner experience with your life, right? Like there are truths that we can know or that we can feel, and yet it's a whole different thing to live in that truth. We spoke last week about how when it comes to goodness, truth, and beauty, there is the awareness, yes, which is internal, but there is also expressing it, which is external. In other words, what if truth shows up as an alignment of our inner world and our outer world? This is really the core of what it means to live an authentic life. Are we operating from a place of authenticity? And anyone in this room who has come out of the closet knows exactly what I'm talking about and how essential this is, and yet how difficult and courageous it must be. And I personally cannot speak from that experience, and I want to hold that experience in the highest honor and respect. But I will say that even sometimes the spiritual journey feels like you're coming out of the closet of sorts. Has anyone felt like that? Friends, you do not need to be impersonating Brad Pitt to be living less than your full, authentic self. It is so important for us to find that place of living from truth in our lives. In fact, it might have everything to do with the entirety of our holistic health and well-being. There was a woman named Bronnie Ware who was a hospice worker who, in her time of sitting with the dying over thousands of different experiences, she began to write about these experiences and began to distill the wisdom and the learnings from these different stories into what she describes as the top 5 regrets of the dying. That maybe that would be some lessons and some medicine for us to see and to bring into our living. And so she found that of these top 5 regrets that showed up in these stories over and over and over again, that the number 1 regret, as she puts it in this term, is this: I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. The number 1 regret of the dying. Maybe, friends, the invitation of truth is to align our inner world and our outer world so that we can live a life true to ourselves, not simply the ones that others expect of us. I don't know what that might look like for you today, but maybe it's having that conversation that you're afraid to have, or taking that step that you're afraid to take, or maybe just living 1% more in a way that is truly authentic to you. But really, this series is about the emergence of goodness, truth, and beauty, and how they all play off and interact with one another. And I think that when we are living in truth, that goodness flows. That when we are living in our truth, that the most beautiful version of ourselves naturally comes through. And perhaps what we are experiencing as chaos in our world is also the emergence of greater truth, which is hopefully, right, I know we're all putting all of our love and our hope and our energy and our care into the fact that maybe it is creating a more just and a more beautiful world. Maybe that's up for us to decide. And so, friends, may we be courageous. May we be courageous to be uncomfortable. May we be courageous enough to be uncertain. May we be courageous enough to trust our inner experience. And may we be courageous enough to align our inner world and our outer world into a life that would be called uniquely our own and authentic. Because if we do these things, then all along the way, we will be expanding, just as the universe has been doing for, about 14 billion years. I want to invite you, if you're comfortable, to close your eyes right now, or just rest a soft gaze. Just taking a moment, as we have been, to close out this service, to recognize that this moment, this experience with this exact group of people cannot be replicated. This exact arrangement of people will never happen again, which is an indication of how precious it all is. And so in gratitude for sharing this moment with all those who are here, we just invite that voice of truth to come back in, to bring whatever it has for us today to the fore once more, to the front of our minds, to the front of our hearts, that we would be willing to look at things that might even be hard to look at, say things that might even be hard to say, and trust that our experience is there for a reason. And when we be able to take these things, these truths with us into our days, into our weeks, and into the months ahead, would we invite them to show up when we need them the most? And with gratitude for those who have shared this journey with us this morning, with love in our hearts, whenever we are ready and comfortable, we open our eyes